Think about the earliest memory you have of money. Not the first time you earned it, but the first time you noticed it. The first time you understood that it meant something. Maybe you were at a grocery store with your mom and she put something back. Maybe you heard your parents whispering behind a closed door about a bill. Maybe you asked for something and the answer was simply, "We can't afford that." Now think about something else. What would it feel like to grow up in a house where those conversations never happened behind closed doors, where money wasn't whispered about, where it was discussed openly, calmly, like any other topic, like talking about what happened at school today or where to go on vacation? I'm not talking about rich parents sitting their kids down to teach them about stocks. I'm talking about something much simpler and much more powerful. The conversations that happen naturally in wealthy homes. Not because the parents sit down and lecture, but because money is just present in the air, like a language spoken at the dinner table every night until the children absorb it without realizing they're learning. If you didn't grow up in a home like that, you've spent your entire adult life trying to learn a language that everyone else seems to already speak, and you didn't even know you were missing the class. There's a moment that happens in some homes, not all wealthy homes, but many. A moment so ordinary you wouldn't notice it if you were watching. A parent comes home from work. They sit down at dinner, and they talk about their day. But they don't just talk about what happened. They talk about why. I turned down a project today. It would have paid well, but it would have taken too much time away from the team I'm already managing. I don't think the money is worth stretching us thin. Or, I'm considering an offer from another company. It's a risk I'd be leaving stability for something new. But I've been thinking about what happens if I don't take it. What am I trading by staying safe? The child sitting at that table isn't being taught about finance. They're not getting a lesson in budgeting or investing. But they're absorbing something deeper. They're learning that money involves choices. That more money isn't always the answer. That risk can be measured, discussed, and sometimes taken. That the question isn't just, how much does it pay? But, what does this cost me in other ways? Now think about the homes where those conversations don't happen. I grew up in a home like that. Money wasn't discussed at dinner. Money wasn't discussed much at all. When it came up, it came with stress, with tension, with words like "we can't," and "maybe someday," and "money doesn't grow on trees." Nobody was doing anything wrong. My parents worked hard. They sacrificed. They did the best they could with what they had, but the message I absorbed without anyone saying it directly was this: money is scarce. Money is stressful. Money is something that happens to you, not something you navigate. That message shaped every financial decision I made for the next 15 years. Not because anyone taught it to me, but because nobody taught me anything different. There's a concept in psychology called implicit learning. The way we absorb knowledge without anyone directly teaching us. The way a child learns to speak simply by being surrounded by language. The way we learn social cues by watching, not by being instructed. Most financial education assumes that learning happens explicitly. Someone sits you down and says, here's how a budget works, here's how compound interest works, here's why you should invest early. But the most powerful financial learning doesn't happen that way at all. It happens implicitly, through observation, through the quiet moments, through the assumptions that hang in the air, unspoken but absolutely present. Rich parents don't necessarily teach their kids about money. They just have money around. They talk about it normally, they make decisions in front of their kids, they let their children see them weighing options, considering trade-offs, thinking out loud about what's worth it and what isn't. And the child absorbs something that no textbook can teach. They absorb that money is a tool, that it's manageable, that it involves choices, not just limits, that you can think about it, talk about it, shape it, instead of just reacting to it. If you didn't grow up in that environment, you don't just lack the information, you lack the orientation. You're not missing a few facts, you're missing an entire framework for how to even see money in the first place. It's like someone handed you a map, but you never learned that maps have a north. You can study the roads all you want, but you'll never understand why everyone else seems to know which direction they're walking. I have a friend, let's call him James. James grew up in a family where money was discussed openly. Not bragging, just discussed. His dad ran a small business. At dinner, he'd talk about decisions, whether to hire someone new, whether to take out a loan for equipment, whether a client was worth keeping. James wasn't being taught business. He was just there, listening, absorbing. By the time James was 25, he'd internalized something I didn't learn until I was 35. He understood that money decisions are rarely about right and wrong. They're about trade-offs. about what you gain and what you give up, about the fact that you can make choices even when none of them are perfect. I grew up in a home where money decisions were made in private, with stress, and presented as final. There was no discussion. There was no, or is what I'm weighing. There was just the outcome and the unspoken message that this is just how things are. So when I got my first real job, I approached money the only way I knew how, with fear. I saved, but I saved anxiously. I spent, but I spent guiltily. I never asked for raises because the idea of negotiating felt like starting a fight. I never took risks because risk meant loss, and loss meant disaster. James approached money like someone who'd been practicing his whole life. He negotiated his salary without sweating. He took calculated risks with side projects. He made investments that scared me, but he made them calmly because he'd spent his whole life watching his dad weigh similar choices. James isn't smarter than me about money. He didn't read more books. He didn't take more classes. He just grew up in a house where money was present instead of hidden, where it was discussed instead of stressed over, where it was a tool, not a threat. By the time we were both 30, that difference had compounded into something massive. Not just in dollars, but in peace of mind, in the ability to sleep at night, in the feeling that money was something he could handle, while for me, it was something I could never quite get control of. So what do you do if you weren't raised in that house? I sat with this question for a long time. For years, I told myself I was behind, that I'd missed the class, that everyone else got something I didn't, and I'd spend my whole life catching up. You can't go back and sit at that dinner table. You can't absorb conversations you weren't invited to, but you can start having them now, out loud, with yourself, with people you trust, with anyone willing to talk about money like it's a normal part of life instead of a secret shame. The goal isn't to learn every financial fact. The goal is to change your relationship with money, to stop treating it like a mystery, to start treating it like a topic you're allowed to discuss, question, and understand. The way you do that is surprisingly simple. You start talking. You ask questions you were afraid to ask. You admit what you don't know. You find people who'll talk about money calmly, without judgment, without making you feel small for not already understanding. You create, as an adult, the conversations you never got to have as a child. The kids who grew up in those homes aren't special. They're not genetically better with money. They just had something that looked like an advantage, but was really just exposure, repetition. The chance to absorb something gradually instead of having to learn it all at once as an adult. That means the advantage isn't permanent. You can build it yourself, not overnight, not by reading one book or watching one video, but by slowly, gently making money a normal part of your life instead of a source of stress you try to ignore. Talk about it with your partner. Talk about it with friends who think clearly. Talk about it out loud, even if it's just to yourself. The goal isn't to become an expert. The goal is to become comfortable, to reach a point where money doesn't feel like a foreign language anymore. The kids at that dinner table weren't learning facts. They were learning comfort. And comfort can be built. It just takes time and practice and a willingness to sound stupid along the way. If you grew up in a house where money was stressful or hidden or just not discussed, you didn't miss a class. You missed an entire curriculum. And that's not your fault. It's not because you weren't paying attention. It's because the lessons weren't offered. But you're not stuck there. You get to decide now what conversations happen in your life. You get to decide whether money stays in the shadows or steps into the light. You get to build, piece by piece, the comfort that others absorbed without trying. It won't happen overnight. It might take years. But every conversation helps. Every question you ask. Every time you talk about money without shame, without panic, without treating it like something you're not allowed to understand. The kids at that dinner table just got a head start. The race is longer than you think, and you're still in it.